On Tuesday of this week, I was sent an electronic copy of a children's book due to be published the following day on Holocaust Memorial Day. The book is called Nikki and Vera, a quiet hero of the Holocaust and the children he rescued. And it is by Peter Sis, an award-winning Czech-born American illustrator and writer of children's books. This book tells the story of Nicholas Winton, the young Englishman who in the spring of 1939 cancelled his skiing holiday and went to Prague to help hundreds of thousands of refugees from the Nazis who were crowded into the city. In the spring and summer of 1939, he arranged the transportation of nearly 700 children to safety. Nicholas Winton never spoke about the rescue mission he organized until his wife found a detailed scrapbook of all the children he had rescued in their attic. In 1988, nearly 50 years after the train journeys that brought the children from Czechoslovakia to England, he was invited to be part of the television program That's Life, in which Esther Ranson showed his scrapbook to the audience and told viewers what he had accomplished. Unbeknownst to him, in the audience were some of the children he had rescued, together with their children and grandchildren. One of those children was Vera Gissing, whose story is told in her own book, based on diaries she kept at the time, Pearls of Childhood. It's hard to describe Peter Sis's book about these two individuals who did not encounter each other until that moment when they were filmed on That's Life. Their stories are told with elegant and moving simplicity, but it is the intricate and beautiful illustrations that reveal even more about their lives. Nicky, growing up in England, appears as a knight in armor, riding one of his pet pigeons, enlarged so that the bespectacled little boy can sit astride. Vera is 10 years old when the story begins, drawn as a tiny figure in her Czech hometown, leading a little army of feline followers. It was a happy childhood for Vera and her sister Eva, one of few Jewish families in their town. It made no difference. They were all friends, writes Sis. When the Germans occupy Sudetenland, thousands of refugees enter the city of Prague and the town where Vera lives. Prague is drawn in a foreboding shade of grey, columns of refugees pouring in through the city gates, while the small figure of Nicholas Winton holding his skis watches in shock and disbelief. We see him set up an office in a hotel in Prague, making lists of children, finding train connections, returning to London to find foster families, applying for visas, and making travel arrangements. And then we see lines of German soldiers marching through Vera's hometown, like ants with guns, and a Nazi soldier telling Vera's father to stop speaking Czech. And eventually, the small figure of Vera hugs her grandfather and is put on a train by her parents at the station in Prague. Vera and her sister Eva and other children are drawn in simple, forlorn, childlike lines shown on the train to England. 8 trains left Prague in the spring and summer of 1939 is the narrative on a double-page spread of drawings of 8 trains, one above the other. The 9th train, due to leave on September 1st, 1939, with 250 children, never left Prague. The book follows Vera's story, her return to Prague at the end of the war to discover that her parents and cousins had all died. Then her return to England, where she married and had a family. Nicky, says the story, lived quietly and never told anyone about what he had done. And it was only when his Danish-born wife found the scrapbook in their attic that this quiet hero's actions came to light. The book ends with the words, 669 children would not have survived if not for Nicky, who went to Prague and saved their lives. I was not a hero, Nicky said. I did not face any danger as real heroes do. I only saw what needed to be done. The words of this beautifully produced book stayed with me throughout Holocaust Memorial Day on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I read a newspaper article which announced the opening of a new Imperial War Museum's gallery in London, which will challenge visitors to beware the Holocaust because you could have been a perpetrator. The gallery is thought to be the first in the world that will present the Holocaust narrative within the context of the Second World War, as well as focusing on the way whole societies were drawn into the conflict through mobilization, direct attack, and occupation. It will also interrogate the identity of the perpetrators. Who was responsible for these crimes? What motivated them? And how ordinary they often were, in every other way. Holocaust Memorial Day draws our attention to the victims of the Holocaust and other genocides. It helps us to remember those who died and to reflect on the quiet heroes like Nicholas Winton or the children who were rescued. Subconsciously, I think many of us ask ourselves, would we have responded to the call, come to Prague, as Nicholas Winton did in the spring of 1939? Would we have had the courage to forge documents, to find foster families, to make travel arrangements for so many children, to defy the authorities of the time? It is often a safer option to think of perpetrators as extremists. It is far more uncomfortable to challenge the view, as the Imperial War Museum's gallery will do, that the perpetrators were brainwashed, hyper-radicalized people. That's not how it really was, says the lead historian on this project, James Bulgin. Holocaust museums for years have been asking visitors to beware the Holocaust because you could have been a victim. I suppose, he said, we are thinking, beware the Holocaust because you could have been a perpetrator. We discover some of those actual perpetrators in the poems of the Irish poet Micheál O'Shiel, whose collection, The Gossamer Wall, are poems in witness to the Holocaust, each poem based on his detailed reading and research. There is 31-year-old Wilhelm Spanaus, a gentle bookseller and staunch Lutheran, who becomes the first of the party members in the Berg, and Ernst Giermann, the party dynamo and angry 26-year-old. Here's a man ruthless, consumed by ambition, stoking every feud and panic in a riven city. In these poems, we see how terror seems to travel and amplify like a myth as frail bonds of friendship begin to unravel. Town after town, city after city passively accede to disillusion, apathy, denial, and indifference to the brutality of the Nazi regime, soft collusions of silence. And he portrays the ordinariness of men and women who learn to annul the victim's face as weeks lull them into a norm of violence, ordinary men hardening in their daily carnage. It is that ordinariness of men and women that should frighten us most about the Holocaust. Ordinary bourgeois booksellers, bank managers, barbers and bailiffs. That and their accommodation to lending a hand, of being a silent and indifferent witness to the theatre of suffering and death. This afternoon, returning from a funeral, I found a package on my doorstep, and unwrapping it, I discovered the publisher of Nikki and Vera had sent me a copy, much larger than I had anticipated, the drawings so finely detailed that I did not even have time to look at them all before this evening's service. It is a true story of courage, determination, and humility, written for young children who will not even know the words Holocaust or Shoah. But this is where their learning will begin, in the words and drawings that portray the ordinariness of humanity, but an ordinariness that places infinite value on human life above all things.